The young and the restless spoilers shock where Cole, secretly alive and now known as Dumas, leads a conspiracy alongside Kane and Claire to take down the Newman family, while Victoria slowly begins to uncover the horrifying truth. The narrative will maintain logical flow, emotional depth, and intense drama, all within a unified prose style with minimal paragraph breaks. Please allow me a moment to compose the full piece. In the shadowed corners of Paris, far from the opulence of Newman Towers and the pristine facades of Genoa City, a plan was unfolding that no one could have anticipated, a scheme built on vengeance, deceit, and buried identities. Though the world believed Cole was dead and buried, his obituary printed, his funeral attended, and his grave mourned, the truth was far more sinister and calculated. Cole was very much alive, breathing not just with lungs but with a renewed sense of purpose, driven by the corrosive force of revenge that had simmered inside him for decades. His resurrection was not a miracle but a manipulation, a decision born out of anger and betrayal that had festered through every fiber of his being since the day he realized he had been discarded, replaced, and forgotten by the Newman dynasty. Beneath layers of identity, Cole had re-emerged in the guise of Aristotle Dumas. A name that now sent tremors through boardrooms and whispers across global business circles, yet no one dared associate him with the man they once knew. No one, except for Claire. Claire, the young woman the world had come to believe was Cole and Victoria's daughter, was in truth nothing more than a perfectly placed pawn, a loyal confidant molded for infiltration. Her every move, every emotion, every tear had been rehearsed and refined under Cole's supervision. She wasn't blood, nor family. She was a soldier. Claire had been indoctrinated, not with fear, but with belief in Cole's vision of justice, his perception of retribution, and the idea that the Newmans needed to be taken down, not just for what they had done to him, but for the rot they represented in a world that rewarded power over principle. And now, she was no longer pretending. Her performance had ended the moment she boarded the private jet bound for Paris and descended into the underground vault where the real empire was being forged, not the Newman empire built on manipulation and image, but the Dumas legacy rising from the ashes of false death. In that dimly lit chamber beneath a forgotten chateau, surrounded by maps, files, and digital feeds tracking every member of the Newman family, Claire joined Cole and his accomplice Kane. An operative whose loyalty stemmed more from desperation than ideology. Kane, once the suave businessman desperate for redemption, had become little more than Cole's tool, a fixer assigned to execute orders without question. His own vendettas against the Chancellors and Newmans had led him into Cole's orbit, and now he functioned as enforcer, messenger, and at times, silent observer of the madness slowly overtaking their leader. Yet madness or not, Cole had become something larger than life. A ghost turned kingpin, a man whose name now carried weight among investors, politicians, and criminals alike. As Dumas, he had built influence that even Victor Newman would find difficult to match. But not everything in Paris remained in the shadows. Back in Genoa City, Victoria had begun to unravel. Though she wore her mask of composure well, those closest to her could see the cracks forming. It had begun with whispers. Rumors of a businessman in Europe amassing power, one who never showed his face but whose methods felt familiar. Then came the sighting. It was fleeting, just a shadow passing through the corridor of a hotel in Montmartre, but it triggered something primal in Victoria. She followed, heart pounding, disbelief gnawing at the corners of her mind. The man moved like Cole. The way he adjusted his cufflink, the slight tilt of his head, it wasn't just resemblance, it was identity. She didn't know what she was chasing, but her instincts refused to let go. That chase led her through alleyways, into the ancient stone basements of the Parisian underworld, where echoes lingered and secrets were stored like wine. She didn't tell anyone. Not Nick. Not Victor. Not even Nikki. This was hers to uncover, hers to confront. Her past, her grief, her betrayal. And so, she watched. She waited. And one night, she followed a trail into an estate she hadn't seen on any map. Guarded, sealed, yet strangely alive with activity. She found an entrance not meant to be found, and she descended into the dark. There, behind a steel door left slightly ajar, she heard voices. First was Kane, his Australian cadence unmistakable, talking about surveillance updates on Nick's movements, Abby's recent trip, and Harrison's schedule. Then came Claire's voice, colder than Victoria remembered, detached, efficient, strategizing on how to poison the Newman public image through upcoming media leaks. But the final voice, low and thunderous, silenced them both. It wasn't just a voice. It was a ghost speaking. Cole. Victoria's blood turned to ice. Her breath caught, her knees nearly gave out. But she remained hidden, just inches from the room, hearing the man she buried months ago now giving commands like a general before battle. He spoke of Victor with venom, of Victoria herself with something akin to scorn, accusing her of siding with the dynasty instead of him. He outlined plans to destabilize Newman Enterprises through manipulated investments, using Claire's proximity to security clearances and Kane's underworld contacts to force a boardroom coup. And then, he uttered the sentence that changed everything: "They took everything from me, and now I'll make sure they lose everything, starting with her." Her. Victoria. The words landed like a blade between her ribs. She stumbled backward, barely avoiding detection, and fled the way she came, gasping as she emerged into the moonlight, her world spinning with revelations too massive to comprehend. The man she loved, the father of the daughter she thought was hers, was alive, and he was coming for her. No longer a man haunted by his past, Cole had become something unrecognizable, something dangerous, something that wanted war. And yet, Victoria hesitated to act. Who would believe her? She had no proof. Just memories, suspicions, and a growing sense that the foundation of her world was about to shatter. She returned to Genoa City, shaken, changed. Her eyes no longer saw board meetings and marketing projections, they saw threats. Every investor call, every share movement, every anonymous tip, she now filtered through the lens of Cole's return. And Claire, the daughter she had once fought to protect, now stood as a stranger. The moments they'd shared. The smiles, the embraces, the desperate attempts at rebuilding, now felt like rehearsed lines from a play designed to break her. Meanwhile, in Paris, Cole watched the screen as Victoria boarded her plane. He knew she had seen him. He didn't care. It was time. The first phase of his operation had always been psychological. The next would be surgical. One by one, he would dismantle everything Victor built. His old nemesis would be forced to watch as his empire fractured, his children turned on one another, and his legacy crumbled into dust. But Cole wasn't simply chasing revenge, he was crafting a legacy of his own, one built not on lies and manipulation, but on cold, methodical justice. He had died to the world to be reborn as something greater, something untouchable. And with Claire and Kane at his side, he would ensure that the Newmans paid for every moment they made him feel invisible, powerless, forgotten. The storm had arrived. And the Newmans had no idea it bore the face of a man they had already mourned. Underneath the grandeur of the chateau that masked the secret operations of the Dumas Empire, a silence fell after Cole left the war room, but it was not the silence of peace, it was the loaded silence of tension threatening to combust. Cole, now entirely consumed by his second life and new identity, had issued the orders with a steel-cold authority that tolerated no weakness. His voice, sharpened like a blade, had sliced through the room as he laid out the next phase of their plan against the Newmans, his once beloved family turned sworn enemies. Yet even as he spoke with absolute conviction, there was an unease beneath his certainty, a flicker of doubt not in the mission, but in his soldiers. He knew Claire and Kane were a volatile mix, two instruments forged for war, but with clashing tempos. Claire, calculating, emotionally detached, and fiercely loyal to the mission but not necessarily to anyone in it, was more a weapon than a partner. Kane, on the other hand, was desperate, servile, and dangerously reactive, a man who obeyed out of fear, not allegiance. Cole understood this dynamic could implode. He had seen the cracks forming in their interactions, subtle glares, curt exchanges, a hesitance when one was asked to defer to the other. He feared that their inability to function as a cohesive unit could derail everything. But fear was not a luxury Cole allowed himself anymore. His voice had thundered: anyone who broke rank, anyone who questioned an order, anyone who deviated even slightly from his plan, would pay the price. There would be no room for sympathy, no tolerance for emotional breakdowns or moral reconsiderations. His empire would not be built on compromise. It would be built on discipline, obedience, and ruthless execution. Kane, though visibly shaken by the warning, nodded like a student before a tyrannical headmaster. Behind his eyes was terror, but also admiration. He respected Cole's mind, feared his wrath, and, in some twisted way, envied his power. For Kane, this was the closest he would ever be to greatness, even if it meant walking the edge of destruction. But far from that underground sanctuary of plots and vengeance, Victoria sat in the darkness of her Genoa city bedroom, body trembling, face soaked in tears that wouldn't stop falling. What she had witnessed, what she had heard, had shattered something primal inside her. She had followed a ghost and found betrayal. She had discovered that the man she loved, the man she had buried, the father of the child she once believed was hers, was not only alive but leading a war against her. And Claire, sweet, lost, broken Claire, how could she have played along with this? How could she stand by Cole's side and plot to destroy the very woman who had opened her home and heart to her? Was none of it real? Had all their moments of connection been a carefully choreographed performance designed to gain access to Newman's secrets? The betrayal cut deepest not because of what they were doing, but because of who they had once been to her. These were not strangers. These were people she had trusted, people she had grieved, people she had fought for. And now, they were standing together, united by a cause that required her downfall as its foundation. Victoria clutched a photograph of Cole and Claire, the corners worn from years of being touched, studied, held close to her chest during lonely nights. Now, the image felt poisoned. Her tears returned, not silent ones, but sobs torn from a soul that had been gutted without mercy. She was angry, but more than that, she was hurt. She wanted answers. Why had Cole turned against her? Why had he faked his death? Why had he chosen destruction over reconciliation? She had questions, but no one to ask. She couldn't tell her father. Victor would launch a war of his own, and the fallout would consume everything. She couldn't confide in Nick or Nate, they would try to protect her, and she needed no protection now. She needed clarity. She needed justice. She needed truth. And so, between gasps of grief and the rising fury in her chest, Victoria made a decision. If Cole wanted a war, he would get one. But it wouldn't be on his terms. She would not crumble beneath his betrayal. She would not allow Claire to dismantle her from the inside. And she certainly wouldn't let Kane slither around in the background, doing Dumas's bidding unchecked. She would expose them all. She would shine a light so bright on their secrets that not even the name Dumas would protect them. Whatever personal pain it cost her, she would not be silent. She would rise from the ashes of this heartbreak, sharper, more ruthless, and more determined than ever before. What Cole had underestimated, what he had always underestimated, was that Victoria was not just her father's daughter. She was more. She had inherited Victor's ruthlessness, Nikki's resilience, and her own unshakable resolve. And if they thought she would be easy to break, they had forgotten who she truly was. The war was no longer approaching. It had begun. And Victoria was no longer a pawn in their game. She was about to flip the board. Back in Genoa City, far from the cold marble vaults and clandestine chateaux of Paris, the surface calm was beginning to ripple. Among those still unaware of the storm brewing underneath the familiar rhythms of the business world, Lily remained a steady presence, always rational, often skeptical, and deeply wary of anything that smelled of Kane Ashby's drama. When she recalled Kane's whispered warning before they departed France, that someone might try to kill him. She brushed it off as theatrics wrapped in paranoia. It wasn't that she dismissed the possibility entirely. Genoa City had seen enough betrayals and power plays to turn the most innocent coffee shop into a battlefield. But Lily had lived through Kane's past melodramas and had long ago learned to separate his genuine danger from his self-inflicted chaos. So when she jokingly suggested, as they huddled in their delayed transport, that perhaps the worst-case scenario was Kane stealing their entire company while they were stuck overseas, it wasn't just humor. It was Lily's way of saying she knew better than to underestimate him. The others laughed half-heartedly, but beneath her smile was a cautious pulse of concern she couldn't quite explain. Meanwhile, in the heart of Genoa City, danger had already returned, quiet, strategic, and sipping coffee. Crimson Lights was never meant to be a battlefield, but it had long served as one in disguise. There, amid the scent of roasted beans and quiet conversation, Kane slid into a corner booth, nodding at the man who approached with evident reluctance. Holden, dressed inconspicuously and keeping his head low, paused before taking the seat across from him. His eyes flicked around the cafe, scanning for signs of surveillance or familiar faces. The very idea that Mr. Dumas, or rather, the man behind the myth, wanted to meet in public struck him as reckless, perhaps even suicidal. "Are you sure about this?" Holden whispered under his breath, his fingers tightening around his coffee cup. "I thought we were supposed to avoid anything like this in the open." Kane didn't flinch. In fact, he leaned in, voice low but steady, his tone unmistakably sharp. "Call me Kane Ashby. Dumas won't be around much longer." It wasn't a request. It was a declaration, one Holden didn't quite understand. The name Aristotle Dumas had become a specter, a symbol of power and anonymity, and for Kane to speak of erasing it felt like blasphemy. "The time's coming," Kane continued, "when we stop hiding behind aliases. Everything we've built? It's about to go live. The Newmans won't see it coming, but they'll feel it. Every inch of it." Holden arched an eyebrow, still confused but trained enough not to question the deeper machinations of men more powerful than him. He was a tool, precisely the kind Cole liked. And in this game, tools didn't ask questions. Still, he couldn't help but press. "And you think this is the moment?" Just like that, Dumas disappears and Kane Ashby steps back into the light? Kane smirked, a smile too hollow to be called confident. "Not entirely in the light. Let's just say it's a new phase." Holden nodded. The transition wasn't his concern. His job was simpler, deliver results. And lately, that had included clearing the way for Kane to remove obstacles in the real estate corridor, properties targeted, pressure applied, legal loopholes exploited. Holden had been quietly involved in several such takeovers downtown, laundering the deals through shells and proxies, just like Kane taught him. It had all gone unnoticed, so far. But the price of secrecy was constant paranoia. "No one suspects anything," Holden assured, "not about the deals, not about us." Kane studied him carefully before speaking again. "That's about to change. I need you back. On the payroll, yes, but off the books. No public records. You work for me. No one else." Holden tilted his head. "And if they ask why I was let go?" Kane's smile returned, darker this time. "We'll say you were a liability." Which is exactly what they'll believe. Holden understood. His termination had always been a formality, a move designed to quiet the watchdogs and distance him from Dumas-related transactions. But now that the real play was beginning, Kane needed him reinstated, quietly, efficiently, invisibly. The world would believe Holden was gone, a disgraced assistant discarded like so many others. But behind the scenes, he would continue his work. Planting information, feeding false leads, and orchestrating logistical cover for everything Cole, Kane, and Claire were planning. Yet as Kane made his exit from Crimson Lights, he knew better than to revel in momentary control. His respect for Cole had grown into something more intense, an odd fear of what the man was becoming. Cole wasn't just planning a hostile takeover, he was orchestrating an annihilation of an entire dynasty. His commands were precise, his vision uncompromising. And Kane, for all his ego and ambition, had felt the chill of those orders echo through his bones. One mistake, one deviation, one misstep in judgment, and Cole wouldn't hesitate to cut him loose, or worse. It wasn't a partnership. It was a hierarchy. And at the top was a man who had risen from his own grave with no heart left for forgiveness. Back in her suite, Victoria lay collapsed against the sofa, the echo of Cole's voice still pounding in her skull. She had heard too much, seen too clearly, and yet couldn't bring herself to stop replaying every word. The betrayal clung to her skin like a second layer, one she couldn't scrub away. Claire, the girl she'd embraced as a daughter, and Cole, the man she had once loved, were planning the obliteration of her family, their legacy, and her name. She tried to recall moments that now felt tainted. Claire's eyes welling up with emotion when she called her mom, Cole's letters from the past that spoke of healing and peace. None of it had been real. It had all been theater, a cruel opera staged to win her trust before cutting it open from the inside. And yet, Victoria knew she could not fall apart. She would grieve later. For now, she needed to be precise. She couldn't charge into Newman Enterprises with these secrets. She had no proof, only knowledge. Knowledge that, if exposed too soon, would make her sound unhinged or worse, paranoid. Victor wouldn't believe her without evidence. Nick would ask too many questions. Nikki would break. So, she would do what Cole never expected. She would play along. Smile when necessary. Pretend ignorance. And while Kane and Holden danced their secret waltz through real estate and Claire wormed deeper into boardroom operations, Victoria would watch, listen, and wait. Cole had chosen to become the storm. But Victoria, she would become the flood. Quiet, creeping, and unstoppable. And when her moment came, she would drown them in the truth.